Hello, everybody. Welcome into a new Patriots Beat podcast here on this Wednesday afternoon. Evan Lazar alongside me, as always, 98.5's Alex Barth. And Alex, we pulled a fast one on everybody yesterday when we said we weren't going to be back till Thursday, but totally slipped my mind at the end of yesterday's show that we would have so much roster movement on Wednesday with the practice squad and other moves that we can get to here in a minute. But I wanted to start I wanted to start here because we're getting news now trickling in off the wire, right? And we should hear here in a few minutes maybe some more roster transactional type of things. So I wanted to start with this morning when we spoke to Patriots head coach Bill Belichick. I just counted. He was asked 9 questions, 9 about Cam Newton, did not mention Cam Newton by name once in that any of those answers. We can also get into Belichick's answer about the COVID-19 vaccination status of Cam Newton, which was interesting to say the least. But were you at all surprised at how evasive Belichick was with his answers about Cam Newton? Because I think on the one hand, everybody always says, oh, this is typical Belichick. He doesn't give any answers to the media, yada, yada, yada. With Cam, it's been different, I would say, with Bill. And I would also say that he has given a lot more insight into players that have left than what he did with Cam Newton this morning.
Yeah, I would say I wasn't surprised for the most part. I didn't think we were going to get a ton. I thought it would kind of be, I already addressed that, blah, blah, blah. But I thought there would be an overarching statement. Cam was a great player for us. We'd like to thank him for, I'd like to thank him for his hard work for the last year and a half. He did everything we asked him to do.
Right.
I thought that, he generally gives that sort of sentiment before moving on. So if he had done that first, the rest of it lines up perfectly. He addressed it. He addressed Cam. He moves on.
Right.
I didn't think we were going to get questions about the testing misunderstanding or any of that, or get answers on the testing misunderstanding or any of that. But the fact that he didn't say Cam Newton's name once, that feels weird to me.
It was one of those press conferences where it almost felt like he felt like it was already been addressed by yesterday's decision, even though he never spoke on it, right? And like you said, the send-off, or a little bit more of a flowery send-off, for lack of a better term, was what I was expecting from Bill Belichick based off of the just identifying the elephant in the room, right? And instead, he just acted like Cam Newton was just another cut, just another procedural decision that the team made yesterday, in the same vein that the Patriots decided to cut D Virgin. They also decided to cut Cam Newton, right? And obviously, from our perspectives as media, it's very, very different things and those types of things. But that's kind of the sense that Bill Belichick gave. He gave very generic boilerplate type of answers about how it's difficult to cut everybody and everybody's in the same boat. Yesterday is a tough day for everyone in the organization, whether you're on the 53-man roster or not. And he also mentioned, as we found out today a couple of times, that it's a fluid situation, right? That this roster is far from set. And we'll get to some of the moves that they made today. But overall, I was very, very surprised that Bill Belichick did not, like I said, multiple opportunities just to say, look, we did what was best for the football team. Cam did everything that we asked of him. Cam did everything that we could, but we felt like this was the best path forward. And we never got that sentence. We never got that sentiment from Bill Belichick. And then we also got some just out of left field opinions, quite frankly, about the vaccine and the efficacy of the vaccine. Nobody asked him, I don't think, for his take on the vaccine, right? I mean, I think it was Ben Volen who asked him if the vaccination status of Cam Newton played a factor, or maybe.
So he was asked twice. He was asked once if the vaccination status played a factor. He said no. And keep in mind, he has to say no to that question. If you look at what's going on in Jacksonville right now, where Urban Meyer admitted that vaccination status played a role, the union's going to come down on him hard if he answers that question with anything but a definitive no. So that was the first one. Then it was, Ben Volen followed it up with kind of a, well, did his availability, blah, blah, blah. And that's where, again, Bill has to say no to that question. He has to answer that question no, or the team's going to lose draft picks. They're going to get fined. He could get suspended, etc. But it was what he said after that was a little striking.
Right. So after he said no initially to the question of Cam's vaccination status,
which again he has to do.
Right. He's then went on, he paused, right? Nobody asked another question yet. He paused, and then he had this statement to make. We have other players on the team who aren't vaccinated, as I would say, probably does every other team in the league. We've had minimal throughout the league. There have been a number there's been a number. Okay, the typos in this.
No. You have it wrong. He said we've had minimal. There's been a number throughout the league.
Right.
So he's saying that they've been minimal in New England, but there's multiple examples around the league.
Right. Of players who have had the virus who have been vaccinated. So your implication that vaccination solves every problem, I would say that has not been substantiated based on what's happening in training camp throughout the NFL this year. So I don't necessarily care one way or another what Bill Belichick's opinions are on a personal level about vaccines. If he's anti-vax, then that's absolutely fine. If that's his opinion, I don't necessarily agree with him, but he's allowed to have his opinion just like everybody else in this country. Now, from a football standpoint, as we've talked about with Cam Newton several times, this matters, right? It matters if you're not vaccinated in the NFL, and the protocols are different from players that are versus aren't. Now, I think Bill Belichick, even though he had to say no, I still think that Bill Belichick was being genuine. I do not think that Cam's vaccination status played a major role in this decision. In fact, I think that Mac Jones won this job outright, and I don't think it was particularly close. From people that I've spoken to on the team in that locker room, it was pretty well known that Mac Jones had a better grasp of what they were doing and was further along in what they were doing this season than Cam Newton for several factors, right? And they felt internally that Mac Jones had clearly won this job. So I actually think that Belichick was being honest this morning in a lot of ways, and I actually do think that Bill Belichick is skeptical about the vaccine in general and would not hold that against a player. And this was a true football decision. I know we might differ on this, but I feel pretty strongly about it based off of what I've heard and who people I have talked to, that Bill Belichick did not put a lot of stock in decisions. And like he said, we have players on the team that aren't vaccinated, right? We have players that are unvaccinated currently on the 53-man roster. So why do those players make the team and Cam doesn't, if this is about COVID, right? This is, to me, was about football, and Mac Jones won the job and Cam Newton lost it.
Yeah, again, I always just to kind of go back to my argument yesterday, I always believe Mac Jones won the job. I thought that this might have been a tipping point, but it wasn't the be all end all. Mac Jones was the better quarterback. Clearly, I truly believe that. But you know what? I'm honestly ready to just move on, and hopefully this is the last time we have to discuss vaccinations on this show.
I don't think it will be, unfortunately, because I think this is going to be a year-long issue.
Well, we'll have to talk about COVID. It's just the vaccines. Like COVID, players are going to get COVID around the league. That's going to happen. But hopefully we're done talking about the vaccine itself.
Okay, so let's talk about, first and foremost, we do know 11 of the 16 players that are going to be signing or have already signed with the Patriots practice squad. I can read out those 11 guys in a second, but I wanted to get to first Malcolm Perry, who the Patriots claimed on waivers. When you claim a player on waivers during the cut down process, that means that player is going on the 53-man roster. This is not a claim to go to the practice squad. So Malcolm Perry on the 53-man roster. They initially cut Harvey Longy to make room for Malcolm Perry on the team, but it sounds like N'Keal Harry's IR status. N'Keal Harry was placed on injured reserve. He will miss the first 3 games of the season. That will now open up the spot for them to bring back Harvey Longy. But unfortunately, due to procedural things, they had to cut Harvey Longy and then bring him back once they get N'Keal through the wire on injured reserve. So N'Keal Harry to injured reserve is a thing. We can discuss that as well. But Malcolm Perry, what are your impressions of Bill Belichick finally getting his Navy guy here, Alex?
Yeah, I think he's going to be fun. Matt Chatham actually had a really interesting point on Twitter where he brought up that, not necessarily the ceiling, but the prototype comp for Mac Jones has sort of been Drew Brees throughout this process. And what did the Saints do to kind of offset some of the Drew Brees physical limits?
Yeah.
Well, they gave him Taysom Hill. They gave him a hybrid quarterback receiver. Well, what's Malcolm Perry? He's not a big, bully ball runner like Taysom Hill is, but could Malcolm Perry be used in a Taysom Hill role? Probably. I don't know entirely. I honestly didn't see him throw the ball much last year, and it's not, Taysom Hill, whatever BYU's offense is, I don't know exactly what it is. It's not a triple option. I mean, Malcolm Perry was doing something completely different in Navy. He wasn't throwing the ball a ton. He did occasionally. So you'd have to look into that. But I like the signing of Perry. We talked about this. If N'Keal Harry was going to miss the beginning of the season, and now we know he is, they were going to need another wide receiver. Perry can do that. He had some depth at running back as well. I think he could return kicks. He hasn't done it. But just having watched him with the ball in his hands, I think he's a guy who could potentially have some success there. So a little 3-week tryout, a little 3-week window, and then you readdress it when N'Keal Harry's ready to go. But I think this is the exact kind of signing this team needed to make. I think it was a good signing.
So we've discussed this a few times, and a guy like Isaiah Zuber was potentially maybe that type of role player, that type of gadget player for this team.
Yeah.
But the Patriots, other than if you consider Jonnu Smith in that mix, which I do think he will be, they did kind of need another guy that could be schemed. It could be used on scheme touches, what I would call it. Reverses, end arounds, jet sweeps, just different misdirection in the backfield as a ball carrier behind the line of scrimmage. And I think Malcolm Perry has shown in the NFL and certainly in college when he was a quarterback, but mostly a runner, right, that he is a very good ball carrier and a very good player in space with the ball in his hand. So another gadget type of player that will be able to be used in a limited role probably, but have some of those elements to it. Now, the Patriots did extensive amount of homework on Malcolm Perry in the draft process. They weren't able to get him, but he was shocked when they didn't get him, right? He said, I thought for sure the Patriots were going to draft me. Bill Belichick talked to me 2-3 times during the draft process, and the board didn't fall that way. So this is Bill Belichick finally getting his guy to a degree. And we're going to talk about another player on the practice squad that they just signed in Ben Mason, who's another guy that I think is Bill Belichick finally getting one of his guys. Now, Malcolm Perry on the team, as Alex and I just both discussed, a ball carrier type of role, right? A guy that you're going to be able to scheme into space, scheme touches for him, and do things like that with him that they didn't necessarily have another guy on the roster that played that type of role unless you wanted to use Jonnu Smith as a featured ball carrier, especially with N'Keal Harry going out. Although N'Keal Harry had varying degrees of success, I would say, with carrying the football and design touches. At least he was somebody that could do it and had done it in the past. So they didn't necessarily have that guy. Maybe Malcolm Perry is that for a little while here for the Patriots. Let's move on to these practice squad signings, though, and we're starting to get basically the entire picture of the practice squad here. We have 11 names. I'll read them off for everybody. Starting with fullback Ben Mason, that's the most recent signing to the practice squad that's been reported. Brian Hoyer, Jelani Tavai, Miles Bryant, Matt Lacoste, Christian Wilkerson, Trey Nixon, D'Angelo Ross, Alex Redmond, Bill Murray, and Deshaun Bauer. So the first part of this, Alex, is certainly the quarterback position, right? And we have both heard, and as Doug Hyde also reported on Twitter, that they are maybe potentially searching for a third arm here at some point. And I think that the big thing that you have to look at with this is that practice squad elevation option, right? So you can have a player on the practice squad and elevate him on game day. The Patriots did it last year with Nick Folk a couple times to get him on the roster for game day to kick in the game. So Brian Hoyer can be elevated at any time to come up for the game in week 1 to be Mac Jones's backup in the season opener against Miami. And still on the surface, the Patriots are only carrying one quarterback on their 53-man roster, and that is Mac Jones. But what were your impressions of Brian Hoyer being the only quarterback here on the practice squad but on the practice squad instead of the 53-man roster, and just the approach the Patriots are taking with the quarterback position right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to waste time talking about, they're keeping Jones and Hoyer as the quarterback because they're probably going to sign a third, and just doesn't make sense to talk about, they only kept 2 because this, and then boom, a third guy takes up one of those last 5 spots. I think with the practice squad, mildly surprising at first, but we should have seen it coming. They didn't even carry a kicker last year. Let's not forget that. And not, instantly. I mean, they didn't have a kicker on their active roster week 1. They promoted Nick Folk from the practice squad. And then I think they did the same thing in week 2. So they don't actually need to carry. I mean, technically they could never carry a second quarterback. They could just keep promoting guys from the practice squad. But, they get kind of 2 weeks here to play with Brian Hoyer's status. And, if that's how you get Malcolm Perry on the roster, if that's how you get, if they're going to go out and get another wide receiver or another cornerback or whoever, if that's how you get those guys on the roster, that's how you keep Harvey Longy on the roster, then that's what it's going to be. So, it works. Again, I'd like to see them bring in a third quarterback regardless, whether it's on the active roster or on the practice squad. But I think this is just Bill using the new rules to his advantage and sort of manipulating things.
Yeah, absolutely. And these rules benefit them in a lot of different ways. Like you mentioned, is a guy like Malcolm Perry able to sign here, or are they able to claim Malcolm Perry, I should say, off of waivers if they have Brian Hoyer on the initial 53? Do they have a spot for him? Harvey Longy probably doesn't make the initial roster at that point, right? And he's probably already on the practice squad or going through the waiver process as well. So there's definitely something to be said in terms of roster management. And we talked about this when we did our projection on Monday, Alex, where I said, Brian Hoyer is a vested veteran. He becomes a free agent instantly. The Patriots don't need to carry him because I didn't really think that there would be much interest outside of New England for Brian Hoyer's services. They seem to feel the same way. And it's actually to the point with a lot of these guys, and I had one agent that I was texting with earlier today mentioned that guaranteed salary in week 1 is a massive part of why these vested veterans are signing on practice squads, right? The Patriots have a couple of them. They have Brian Hoyer. They have Matt Lacoste. He's a vested veteran that's now signed to their practice squad. And these guys around the NFL are having a tough time getting offers for 53-man rosters because of that guaranteed week 1 salary. So they are seeing a lot of these vested veterans sign with practice squads and get more practice squad offers. Matt Lacoste is a player that had half a dozen practice squad offers, but 0 53-man roster offers, right? Because of the way that the salary cap works and the way that contracts work in the NFL. So a interesting move. I mean, it's basically the same thing that they did with the kickers last year. It's really no different than that. And yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's, if we're just kind of projecting out the rest of the practice squad here, I think, 5 spots left. I think one goes to quarterback, and I could see another going to a kicker too.
Yeah, me as well. So a couple of these other practice squad, we're going to talk about some of the guys that they were able to retain on the practice squad. Again, I don't know if I mentioned it, but the Patriots had nobody claimed on waivers that they released yesterday. So everybody cleared waivers for the Patriots in terms of the guys that had to go through the waiver process. So everyone was an option for the Patriots to re-sign on the practice squad. So we'll get to some of the players that they were able to bring back. But was Ben Mason the most predictable signing that we all should have seen coming? Because this was fascinating. Now, Ian Rappaport said that the Patriots are signing Ben Mason under the impression, at least as it was presented to Rap Sheet, to quickly elevate him to the 53-man roster when a roster spot becomes available. So first and foremost, what do you think about them getting Ben Mason here in the fold? As soon as I saw Ben Mason was waived yesterday, I thought that my ears perked up, right? I thought this would be a possibility. But now it sounds like Ben Mason has a legitimate chance to knock Jakob Johnson off the roster, unless they're going to carry 2 fullbacks.
Which they might. We went from, I was sitting here saying they're not going to carry a fullback to, maybe you go 22 personnel, 2 tight ends, 2 fullbacks, and you just push your way down the field, I guess. I don't know. It's interesting. I think the nature of the fullback position is highly physical. Yeah. And I think it's a spot that you just, you want that depth, right? You want that extra depth. Because, we remember what happened when James Devlin went down and then Jakob Johnson got hurt shortly after as a rookie, and they really didn't have anybody for that role. So they have some more depth there now. I also wonder if it's maybe a thing where he's going to be elevated quickly, then sent back. Maybe if Hunter Henry's not ready to go and Matt Lacoste isn't ready to go, instead of adding another tight end, you just kind of use him as essentially a blocking tight end, right? Mason, and you put him on the line of scrimmage, or you put Johnson on the line of scrimmage and Mason is the fullback, whatever it is. I I find it hard to believe Johnson's roster spot's at risk, because I think if it was, he would have been one of these guys they cut to IR players or bring somebody back. So that's an interesting one. But yeah, it made a ton of sense. Michigan, fullback, plays the game they want to play. It makes sense that he's in New England.
He's one of those guys that, what was the Landon Roberts quote? I'm going to hit somebody's mother
run through a mother effer's face.
Yeah, Ben Mason's a guy that runs through mother effer's faces, right? He is a no-nonsense sledgehammer, and he definitely reminds me, when I watched him at Michigan, a little bit more of a James Devlin, right? Who is just an absolute battering ram. And not saying that Jakob Johnson's not a physical player and doesn't have good play strength, but Ben Mason at Michigan was a absolute force as a lead blocker. So I think the Patriots not only see Ben Mason as a potential guy to push Jakob Johnson right now, I actually think that he could be their fullback for a while if he's able to stick here in New England. This could be a 4 or 5 year thing with Ben Mason.
Johnson is, well, we'll have to see what kind of they might have only signed him a 1 year deal. Johnson is a restricted free agent after this season. So his contract is, they technically have team control. It wouldn't cost them a ton to keep him, but his contract is up at the end of the year.
Right. So I definitely see Ben Mason being a guy that could potentially be here for a while, which is interesting just because I thought Jakob Johnson had a great summer. I thought that he's been good in the role that they've asked him to play as a lead blocker. So although you're always looking to upgrade and you're always looking to get better at every position, I don't know if I necessarily saw an upgrade on Jakob Johnson as necessary, right? This more just kind of fell in their laps and maybe they just couldn't say no to it.
Yeah, I mean, that I think that's kind of the case with Malcolm Perry too. I don't know that he's the kind of receiver they needed. We talked about it yesterday. Brashad Perryman, who was the other one? John Brown, right? Good player, and when good players are out there, he was right there. They weren't going to have to give up anything to get him, so it made sense.
So the other player, we mentioned Mason, we mentioned Perry. The other player that is reportedly signing with the practice squad that wasn't here in Patriots training camp is Jelani Tavai from Detroit, formerly a Matt Patricia player, 6'2", 250-pound thumping linebacker, pretty much a Juwan Bentley archetype, right? Basically the same type of player as a Juwan Bentley. This makes a lot of sense for the Patriots too. He signed with the practice squad to vie, but I think that he has a chance to play in some games this year, especially if Bentley gets injured or Hightower gets injured or one of those linebackers go down. And just your prototypical Patriot linebacker that Matt Patricia obviously thought highly of in Detroit as well.
Yeah, and your prototypical Patriots, signing for this time of year, a guy who was a second-round pick, right, in 2019, kind of never got there with the Lions, and they're going to give him another shot, which is what they like to do. Maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't, but, they're buying low on a guy with potential. The other one I'm wondering about is Pernell McPhee got cut, and I think he might have gotten to a practice squad, but that still technically means he's a free agent. He always seemed like a guy that would be a fit for their system. I wonder if they'd give him a chance.
Yeah, on the one hand, you do get a little bit, I wouldn't call it annoyed, but definitely a little bit frustrated with the fact that the Patriots are still so dead set on signing and drafting and bringing in these 250 plus linebackers that aren't great in space and aren't great in coverage. Now, the way around it is that you always have those guys moving forward. You keep them clean at the second level. You allow them to come downhill in the trenches, and you may basically turn those guys into forward missiles, right? You're either the blitz or you're going to stop the run, but you're not going to drop much in coverage.
Well, that, and you have bigger run covering safeties like Adrian Phillips and Kyle Duggar.
Right. Exactly. So that's the way around it, but it definitely is. It's something that the rest of the league is going away from, right? The rest of the league is looking for these athletic Darius Leonard type of linebackers, right? Or Deion Jones in Atlanta. These type of guys that are great coverage guys. Fred Warner in San Francisco that are fantastic in space, that can drop into coverage and basically cover from the linebacker position like a safety, right? That's what the rest of the league is looking for because of the way these passing attacks. The Patriots are still picking up all of these 250, 255 pound thumpers. And maybe that Belichick, as he often does, looks at it and says, I'm going to go where it's cheap, right? The rest of the league is paying these athletic guys crazy money. Fred Warner, I believe, just signed a huge deal. Darius Leonard just signed a huge deal. So maybe he feels like that's where the best value is to stick this course. And obviously his system asks for these linebackers to be able to read both gaps, take on guys in the line of scrimmage, take on lead blockers, take on just everybody, right? Whether it's a climbing offensive lineman, it's a fullback, it's a ball carrier in the hole. These guys have to have great take on technique and ability to do that. But certainly we see this as a Belichick kind of sticking to his old guns, and the rest of the league evolving maybe a little bit more to the passing game.
Yeah, that's maybe a little bit of it. But again, I think he's going to keep doing what he's doing. When the league zigs, he zags. That's what he likes to do. That's how he's doing it.
Fair enough. All right, let's talk about some of these guys that stuck around on the Patriots practice squad. First and foremost, Miles Bryant passing through waivers was a surprise to me, especially with how good some of his tape was from last year. So He passes through waivers, re-signs with the Patriots practice squad. Were you surprised that Miles Bryant was able to get back to the practice squad first? And second, why do we think he did? Right? I mean, what does the rest of the league see? What do the Patriots even see by cutting him? I'd mentioned the size thing yesterday because that's the only thing that I can think of that would be the factor here. At 5'7", 5'8", 180 pounds, he's not big enough to play a slot corner role in the NFL. But the Patriots cut him. Miles Bryant passes through waivers and clears waivers. He could be hurt. That could be a factor that he might not pass a physical right now if he were claimed by another team. But what do you think is going on with Miles Bryant?
I think it's got to be the injury. I think that's got to be it. There's no other reason. He's a good NFL, hybrid defensive back. Not great, right, but he's good. He certainly provides solid depth. I think it just wasn't, because the way the waiver order works, you put in a claim on a player, you go to the bottom of the waiver order until somebody else claims a player. So, with an injury for a guy who's not going to be able to play right away, I just wonder if teams didn't want to initially give up their spot on the waiver wire. I almost wonder if there's a higher chance he would have been claimed if he had been kept and then waived today in that first, because he would have been one of the best players on that second, the second wave. I can't think of a better way to phrase that, but it's got to be the injury for me. So that's kind of why I figured he got through. He wasn't the biggest surprise for me. That was Christian Wilkerson because he's healthy. But right, I would think whatever injury Brian's dealing with, it was enough that team said, you know what, we can go get somebody else. Because here's the thing. You're not signing Miles Bryant necessarily with a super long-term projection. He is a long-term projection guy, but a guy like that, you're probably signing right now to fill a need. But the reality is he's hurt. So he's not going to be able to fill that need right now. So that might have protected him. So mildly surprised. I thought somebody might take a shot on him, but I was more surprised by Wilkerson getting through.
Yeah, the way that I look at Miles Bryant, too, is just he's got great versatility. He can play multiple spots. He can play a little bit of safety. He can play a little bit of slot corner. He's got NFL-level cover talent, right? He's definitely somebody, especially in man coverage systems, that can hang and cover guys man-to-man pretty well. But that size thing, if you're looking for a football reason, I also think it's probably mostly the injury. But if you're looking for a football reason, when you're going to play in the middle of the field and you're going to play in the slot or you're going to play down in the box and you're 180 pounds soaking wet, that's going to be a problem, right? That's going to be an issue in this league. And I do think that that's coming up with Miles Bryant a little bit just based off of the lack of interest around the league in his services and the Patriots wanting to cut him as well. So Christian Wilkerson's the other name that you mentioned. He is back on the practice squad too. Another player that had options in terms of practice squad options. He could have gone and signed with a lot of teams' practice squads. No 53 offers, no waiver claim. So Christian Wilkerson comes back to the Patriots practice squad. This to me is good. I thought before the Malcolm Perry news came out that Wilkerson might get elevated once N'Keal Harry went on injured reserve. They end up claiming Malcolm Perry instead. So Wilkerson needs to wait a little bit longer to potentially get his chance. But if there's an injury at that wide receiver room on the 53, I don't think the team is going to hesitate with calling up Christian Wilkerson for a game or two.
Yeah, and what I would say is maybe it's even Wilkerson week 1, right? Perry just got here. Can he get ready in time for week 1? If they have more long-term aspirations with Perry, Wilkerson's been here. He knows the offense. He has chemistry with Mac. I wonder if they go with Wilkerson week 1, and then in week 2, maybe you start bringing Perry into the fold, right? Where Perry's maybe a healthy scratch in week 1. So that's nothing against Malcolm Perry, but it's a tough turnaround. You got a week and a half to learn a new offense against a guy who's been here for now a full calendar year, right? Because he got signed, Wilkerson did, by the Patriots on this date last year to the practice squad. So I
don't know. I'm really not trying to bring it back to the vaccine, but do we know if Malcolm Perry's vaccinated or not? Because that's a 5-day window.
Right.
I have no idea.
You know what?
Out there.
I think because isn't there a military mandate? Because he's still technically Navy Reserve, I think, like Joe Cardona.
Potentially.
So he may have to be by the military. You're right. I don't want to get into that. Anyway, either way, it's a quick turnaround. Whether that 5-day window's there or not, I still wouldn't rule out Christian Wilkerson for week 1.
I wouldn't either. I thought Christian Wilkerson did enough early on in the summer. He was starting to also gravitate towards Matthew Slater, Justin Bethel, Cody Davis, Brandon Bolden, Brendan King. We talked a lot about this, right, with the special teamers, and he was over there a lot working on his technique, working on his craft as a special teamer, and it felt like first 10 days of training camp that Wilkerson was very much on the roster, right? It felt like that he had earned that, and they were starting to cross-train him at different special teams roles to have him be able to potentially play, be active on game day. And then it just completely fell apart for him. But that player still came out at times. I thought against the Giants, he made some good plays in the passing game. One of them was a nice adjustment by Mac Jones, and just in terms of the plays that they were calling. He had a run play or a pass play, checked out of it, got to the pass play, and was able to hit Christian Wilkerson on that crosser. He also was able to hit Christian Wilkerson on a little bit of a route adjustment early. His very first completion was a 21-yarder to Christian Wilkerson off play action, where Wilkerson saw the post safety, sat the route down, and made himself available to Mac Jones. That was a pretty solid route adjustment and just a savvy move by Christian Wilkerson to understand what he was doing out there. So I wasn't initially on the Christian Wilkerson bandwagon, and then everybody kind of came off the Christian Wilkerson bandwagon right there for after the Philadelphia joint practices and things like that. But I thought he turned it back on a little bit the last week of training camp with the Giants, and specifically in that preseason finale against the Giants. So I do think that there is a role for him on this team in the future, and I'm glad that they were able to keep him on the practice squad. I thought for sure he was going to get claimed, and when he didn't get claimed, I thought maybe there will be a 53 offer for him down the road, but it hasn't turned out that way. Matt Lacoste is another player that could have gotten signed.
By the way, sorry, real quick, Malcolm Perry, I just looking this up. Malcolm Perry graduated but was not commissioned, so okay. I don't think he'd be subject to any military requirements.
Okay. So Matt Lacoste also signed with the Patriots practice squad. I mentioned earlier that these vested veterans are having a tough time. The guys that were vets that got cut, like a Matt Lacoste that didn't have to pass through waivers, they didn't have very many of those guys sign with 53-man rosters. A lot of these guys are signing with practice squads due to the way contracts work in the NFL. So I honestly think Matt Lacoste has gotten a little bit of a bad rap by a lot of Patriots fans, because when they signed him in 2019, he was forced to basically be the number one tight end on the depth chart, and that wasn't his fault, right? He should not have been a number one tight end on the depth chart. The Patriots just had so little depth and so little talent at that position after Rob Gronkowski retired for a year, that Matt Lacoste was put into a position where he was damned, like there was no way that he was going to be able to produce at the level that he was being asked to produce at. So as a tight end 3 or now a tight end 4 on the practice squad, this is a solid depth option here, right? No one's saying that he's an all-pro player, a Pro Bowl player, but to get Matt Lacoste as the 4th tight end on the practice squad is a solid move, I would say.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I thought, and I wasn't super high on Matt Lacoste coming in, but I thought he had a very good summer up until he got hurt. And I wonder if you mentioned the financial element of it too. I wonder, kind of like we talked about with Bryant, if a team's just not super eager to sign a guy coming right off a concussion. I think that might have helped a little bit. and you see these new practice squad rules in effect here. He's a good guy to have around, though, with as banged up as Hunter Henry's been, given what he showed this summer. That I think that it's a sneaky good practice squad addition for the Patriots.
I think so as well. I'm not trying to sit here and say that Matt LaCosse is Rob Gronkowski 2.0. We should give him more credit. I'm just saying that Matt LaCosse gets a lot of flack for not being Rob Gronkowski 2.0 when he never was, right?
It's funny. He was kind of like his situation on a much smaller scale kind of mirrors what Cam Newton dealt with last year in some ways, right?
Right.
Because I think a lot of the hatred towards Cam Newton was simply the fact that he was not Tom Brady.
Right.
And LaCosse was, like you said, not Rob Gronkowski, but he's a guy, again, they shouldn't start him. But let's say Hunter Henry gets banged up and, it's a lot, but you're a lot better off promoting Matt LaCosse in the practice squad for a week and giving Hunter Henry a week off, as opposed to having to put Hunter Henry on IR and you lose him for 3 weeks.
Right.
So you can give him, put him on the healthy scratch, give him the week off, let him heal up. So it's, again, he's not starting. Let's not act like I'm not celebrating he's here because he's starting, but I think having him available on the practice squad, if he needs to fill in for a pinch, there's much worse guys you could have in that role. I think he's just about as good as you can get in that role, especially given the fact that he's been here for years and he knows the offense.
Another player that stood out in that Giants finale, Alex D'Angelo Ross, coming back to the practice squad too. This one is both Bryant and Ross being on the practice squad is sneaky big because Jonathan Jones doesn't sound like his injury is going to be long-term, but he is a little bit banged up. And right now on the 53, unless you're going to consider Mills an inside guy, but he has to play outside right now because of Stephon Gilmore's situation, the Patriots are a little bit thin at slot corner. So getting Miles Bryant and D'Angelo Ross back on the practice squad gives them some security there.
It does. They can play Shaun Wade in the slot too. I think they like him as an outside corner.
Yeah.
But he played in the slot in college. I asked cornerbacks coach Mike Pellegrino about this today. He said, one of the things they love about Wade is his versatility, right? He's a DB. That's what he said. He's a DB. He's an overall defensive back.
Right.
They value guys that can do that. But, if he's not ready for week one, I certainly think Bryant, if healthy, is a candidate to be elevated week one. If he's not healthy, I think D'Angelo Ross is a guy you could see on an emergency basis just to kind of give them some depth. They're only carrying 8 defensive backs, 4 corners, 4 safeties. That's not a ton either way. So I had
projections that had them with 10, 11 defensive backs.
I had them at 10, I think.
Right. Yeah, that sounds right.
They do have one more with Justin Bethel. I should include him in that equation because he did have a great summer playing cornerback, and it does sound like they want him to play a little corner, but they are still, you mentioned in the slot, thin. It's Jonathan Jones and then Shaun Wade, who just got here. So, yeah, I definitely think Miles Bryant at some point ends up on the active roster, and I wouldn't be surprised if D'Angelo Ross, even as a temporary elevation, ends up on the roster as well.
Me neither. Ernie Adams' guy, Trey Nixon, ends up back on the practice squad. I'm interested to see more out of Trey Nixon. I think that he has an NFL future, maybe a year away, has to fill out a little bit, work on his body a little bit. He missed a ton of practice time, so it was difficult for him to pick it up this year. He surprised me, I would say, with his quickness and his ability to create separation at the top of the route out of the slot. We saw in college at UCF his ability to separate vertically, right, to run down the sideline and get open over the top of the defense. But in the limited action that we saw Trey Nixon with the Patriots in training camp, he was winning a lot more inside as a slot option. And when he was healthy, there were times there where him and Mac Jones had quite the rapport working inside with those little inside option routes. And Trey Nixon looked like he had a good feel for those. So he's a developmental player that doesn't beat out a guy like Gunnar Olszewski yet, just because of Gunnar's punt return ability. But in terms of another guy that they could add in that mix in the slot, I think Trey Nixon could be somebody like that in a couple of years.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think Nixon does have NFL upside, but like you said, he's at least a year away. I said it from the draft. This was the perfect outcome for Trey Nixon. This is exactly what you were looking for. He's going to get on the practice squad. He's going to sit behind Jacoby Myers, Nelson Aguilar, Kendrick Bourne, learn from these guys for a year, and then we'll see what he puts into practice next summer, and he can make a real run at the roster next summer. I think that's exact. That, in my mind, should have been the plan when they drafted him. That was always probably the best case scenario for him, and here it is in practice.
Right. Any love for Bill Murray or Tashawn Bauer? I've been a Tashawn Bauer guy.
I know you're a Tashawn Bauer guy, yeah.
Yeah. Bill Murray had a decent camp, a decent preseason, beat up on some bad offensive linemen late in some of these preseason games. He was near the top of the league in terms of interior defenders, pressures per snap, all those types of PFF metrics, ranked really highly in those. But granted, he did add up a lot of those pressures in 3 minutes to go in the fourth quarter against guys that are no longer on teams right now in the interior of the offensive lines. But I've been a Bauer guy. I think Bauer is another one of those guys that you lose some bodies on the edge of the defense. They've just got insane depth there right now on the 53-man roster with Judon and Van Noy and Uche and Winovich and Ronnie Perkins. And they just have too many bodies there for Bauer to make the team. But if one of those guys goes down, or two of those guys goes down, a guy that's long, got good play strength, plays the position the way that they want to play it in terms of setting the edge and not rushing past the quarterback and just doing those little types of things that they like. I like Bauer. Do you like Bauer? Do you like Bill Murray? Do you like any of these other guys that they kept that you think could maybe at some point be elevated for a game day type of roster spot?
Yeah, I have to pull up the full list because I don't remember who we talked about. I like Bauer. I think Bill Murray's an interesting guy just because he started playing a ton of special teams at the end of the summer, and you don't generally see that from a defensive tackle.
Right.
Cut out. Sorry, were you about to say something? You kind of froze up.
Oh, no. I think it's funny that at 290, maybe even 300 pounds, Bill Murray's out there covering kicks. It was just funny to see.
Yeah. So, I think that he's a guy that they'd like another look at next summer. I'm looking at the list. The only name we really haven't talked about is Alex Redmond, so he's still here. So now we've named all 11. I will say this. Here's my thought, and they've done this before. So there are 11 players right now out of 16. They don't have to carry 16. And Miguel Benson, Pat's cap on Twitter, right? He has their cap number right now at just under $6 million, and they're going to want room to make moves during the season. I still think they're going to add a quarterback. I wouldn't be shocked if they had a kicker. After that, they might be done. They might carry 13, 14 guys and leave a couple spots open and just save that money. I wouldn't rule that out. What was it a couple of years ago? Do you remember the 7? Because we had talked about this. It was our first or second year on the beat, and they were super, super up against the cap. And I think they had like 4 guys they cut half their practice squad randomly during the bye week. And then they had like 4 guys on the practice squad the rest of the year. I wouldn't, $6 million should be enough to get you through the rest of the year. It should. But, if they want room to say trade for a corner at the deadline or something like that, maybe have to pull some salary in. I could see them maybe staying a little under that 16. Again, 13 or 14 guys on the practice squad.
Yeah, I definitely think that another quarterback is coming, and I don't know who. I wish I could tell you who, but there are some.
I have a list. I do have, and I got made fun of for teasing this too much this morning by Adam Jones on 98.5 The Sports Hub, but 98.5thesportshub.com. I do have a list of 6. Well, I guess it's 5 quarterbacks now.
All right, give me your list, and then I have a couple. I'm sure maybe a few of them are on your list.
Yeah. So there's 3 ways they can go. They can just the known commodity, right? The guy that's been here knows the offense. That would be Jake Dogala, of course, and then Brian Lewerke, who was only here for a little bit last summer, but he sort of knows. Then they could go with, another Brian Hoyer, just another veteran, another teacher for Mac Jones. I look at a guy like Garrett Gilbert, who I thought given the role, did well last year in Dallas, and Josh Johnson, who's been on 14 NFL teams. He's been cut 20 times, but hey, he's seen everything. That knowledge is valuable. You're not looking for
20 times.
He's been cut 20 times. Yes. Wow. He's been on 14 NFL teams plus 3 other professional teams. He's with the Sacramento Mountain. Let me see if I can do this. The Sacramento Mountain Lions, who I think were the UFL. He was with the LA Wildcats of the XFL. And then he was with an AAF team, the San Diego Fleet. So he was with 3 non-NFL teams, and the Sacramento Mountain Lions were the UFL. They were not the FXFL. So that's the one league he hasn't played in. But yeah, 14 teams since 2008. He's seen a lot of football. And then the other category they could go to is because they still do need a backup quarterback. I don't think it's Brian Hoyer beyond this year. And, if we were to project ahead, and there's a lot that's going to happen between now and then, but if we were to project ahead, I would say that they're probably going to need a quarterback again next offseason. Not a starter, obviously, hopefully, but they still need to find a backup, a sustainable backup for Mac Jones. So maybe they dip into that pool. I thought that potentially Will Grier could be a guy who could come in and be a backup for them for 3 or 4 years. I liked his upside. He was claimed by the Cowboys. The other option, somebody beat me to it in the chat, Kyle Lauletta.
That was going to be the name I was going to drop.
Right, who they reportedly really liked coming out in the draft in 2018. Somebody mentioned Stidham. He's going to be out for at least the first 6 weeks. So you can bring in any one of these guys, cut him 6 weeks in, and Stidham becomes your third quarterback. Or you could just roll with this guy and not activate Stidham, especially because maybe you want to keep this guy on the practice squad. If you activate Stidham, you then have to cut him to get him back on the practice squad. He might get claimed. So I wouldn't rule out a third guy. Those are kind of the 3 branches they could go. I guess Danny Etling falls into that first category too, but he's really bad. But yeah, there's a number of directions they could go.
Yeah, the one player quarterback I can tell you that it's not is Ben DiNucci. That's the only one I got. I don't know who it is, but I know it's not Ben DiNucci. The other quarterback that I wanted to throw out there was Kyle Lauletta, who had a decent camp in Cleveland.
Oh, what about our guy Tim Boyle?
Oh no, not Tim Boyle.
Is he anywhere?
Kyle Lauletta had a decent camp in Cleveland.
Tim Boyle's on the Lions, by the way.
Very poor man's Alex Smith, right? Very weak arm. It takes a lot of air under the ball to get the ball down the field with a guy like Kyle Lauletta, but he's got a quick release. He knows how to read the middle of the field. He takes care of the football for the most part. You're not going to ask him to throw vertical. You're not going to ask him to throw 50-yard bombs all game. But if you want to win in the quick game and get the football out and operate within 20 yards of the line of scrimmage with anticipation, Kyle Lauletta can be that type of player. The other one that I would mention, I know that people are going to hate this, but Trevor Siemian also got waived. And at least Trevor Siemian has some NFL starter experience, right? And when you look at just the backup to a guy like Mac Jones, you want to have it stylistically match up a little bit, and you want to have that guy have a little bit of NFL experience in starting games. And if you're not going to trust Brian Hoyer to be the backup in that respect, then maybe a guy like a Trevor Siemian, who's definitely started a ton of games in the league and knows what he's doing. It could be an option there as well. But Lauletta would be my choice if I had to pick any of these quarterbacks that got cut over the last 24 hours, and not Matt Barkley, not DiNucci. I just said that's not happening. But maybe somebody that we just mentioned will be the third quarterback, because the Patriots are. I would be shocked at this point, Alex, if they don't bring in a third QB.
What was his name? The USC quarterback who was here for a minute. Cody Kessler. Is Cody Kessler?
Cody Kessler. Oh, that's an interesting one. I think Cody Kessler is a free agent.
He's a free agent. He hasn't been on a roster, it looks like, since he was on the Patriots practice. I mean, he was on the practice squad pretty much the whole time in 2019. Oh, no, he wasn't. He was here for the last 2 weeks of September, first 2 weeks of October. Oh no. And then he was here. He was basically here the whole season, except 2 weeks in October.
Right.
So Cody Kessler makes a ton of sense too. I didn't even think of that.
Well, you would think Brian Hoyer is going to be the scout team quarterback, but there was a lot of praise for Cody Kessler's work as a scout team quarterback during his time here, because
he's a little more mobile. He's not like, right. He's not Lamar Jackson, but he can be a different kind of quarterback for you.
He can mimic some of the mobile stuff. Yeah, just a little bit. So maybe that is a player that they could call upon. Blake Bortles, what do you think?
I thought Blake Bortles was somewhere.
No, Blake Bortles is a free agent. I looked it up earlier. He's a street free agent right now.
We know. I mean, we know they like him. We do know they like him.
They liked him in the draft way back when. They've learned a lot about Blake Bortles since then, right? So
he is somehow only 29. So in theory, you could sign him to like a 2-year, 3-year deal, and it's not unrealistic to think, like I talked about with Garrett Gilbert, he could be your backup for a little bit. Not Trace McSorley.
No,
Trace McSorley.
He's on. Well, he got signed by the practice squad in Baltimore.
Okay. He's just a worse version of Johnny Manziel. No, I guess I could see Blake Bortles. It's probably not the worst idea.
All right. Well, the waiver wire, or the transaction wire, I should say, came out. The early transaction wire just came out, and no practice squad announcements on the wire. So it's going to be the 8 o'clock transaction wire that's going to have all the practice squad players on, or maybe it's 7. It's 7 or 8 o'clock. I always forget. One of those two will have the signings that the Patriots have already made. Like Alex said earlier, there's probably a pretty good possibility that the Patriots will not complete their entire 16-man practice squad today, right? They might leave a few spots open. There might be a few negotiations or a few guys that are still deciding. One guy that I know that is definitely still deciding as well as Isaiah Zuber. As you might have noticed, we did not mention him as one of the guys that have signed with the Patriots practice squad yet. He is still weighing his options as well. So I think Zuber's maybe sensing, okay, Christian Wilkerson signed with the Patriots practice squad. Trey Nixon signed with the practice squad with New England. I'm going to be the third receiver on the practice squad. Maybe go someplace else where there's a little less competition. So Zuber is still out there. That's a possibility. Will Sherman's still out there, right? The rookie offensive lineman. They didn't sign him yet to the practice squad. So still some options. 5 spots remain open, but Alex and I will be back on the podcast. Now, I don't know when we're going to do the podcast next, Alex, because the schedule tomorrow is right in the middle of our typical showtime for the pod. So I'm not going to walk ourselves into a schedule like I did yesterday and then have to tell everybody we're making an adjustment. So we'll be back on the pod. Follow both of us on Twitter. I'll put up our Twitter handles because we keep it. Oh, I didn't mention Jeff Driscoll as a quarterback option. That's
no, he signed. He was like the first practice squad signing across the league, I think.
Oh, did he sign already?
I thought I saw. I think Dallas. I could have sworn I saw he was like the first signing this morning. Yeah, he signed the Texans practice squad.
Okay, all right. So that one's off the table.
He also sucks.
Yeah, he does. All right. So you can follow both Alex and I on Twitter. You can see the Twitter handles right there. And we'll keep you updated about when we're going to be back on the podcast. We have a special guest that we're trying to get on the show as well. If you listen to our podcast right after the draft, we had Tim Jenkins on, a former NFL quarterback, to break down Mac Jones. Tim told us Mac Jones is going to be great, and he was spot on about his analysis back then during the draft process. So we're going to have Tim back on, and then we're also going to discuss with Tim Mac Jones and the Patriots offense moving forward and all those types of things. So we'll keep you posted on our Twitters at Easy Lazar, at Real Alex Barth, about when the next pod is going to come down. But we wanted to jump on here tonight and talk about the practice squad and some of the moves that the Patriots made today. So keep it right here on Patriots Press Pass for a lot more coverage from Wednesday's roster movement and beyond, and as we get into the regular season. And follow both Alex and I on Twitter. You can see the handles right then and there. But thanks to everybody for watching, and we'll see you soon.